Hi, I'm Sandy McDaniel. I'm so glad you decided to join me. Last session, we talked about how important it is to be consistent. We talked about several reasons, but the two I want you to remember are, if you want your children to feel safe in your home, and it's imperative that they feel safe in your home, they're going to go out there and fight dragons, out there being outside of home, and fight dragons. They need to have a place where they can come home and rest and recuperate and feel safe. Safety in your home is dependent upon you being consistent. They know when they're going to get in trouble. They know what the consequence is going to be. It's not a field of landmines and they don't know where the landmines are. Consistency is beyond important. It's essential. And it also teaches children to use power well, which is what this whole game is about. Today we're going to talk about something, probably one of the more difficult topics for you. You teach most by what you model. That's terrible news. Go, and turn off the computer. Because if you think about it, you've got to take responsibility for it. You teach most by what you model. You can say to a child, don't you even think of lying to me? You lied to me. You haven't seen the kind of trouble that's coming your way. And then you're on the phone telling a little white lie. What's a lie? What's a white lie? A lie is a lie. You're on the phone, or you're telling your husband or your wife something, a story about what happened in the day, and it's not quite the way it happened. And the little children with the discrepancy detectors, and they all have them, are going, excuse me, you're lying. You can't say, do this, and then do it yourself, or don't do this and do it yourself. You can't. You teach most by what you model. And see, what you have to understand is that every day you're sculpturing, you're modeling a human being. This isn't a job you can put off until you feel better about doing it. Every day you're sculpturing a human being. And you'll say to me, hey, I didn't go to parenting school. Yes, you did. Every single day that you were a child. Because you teach most by what you model, but you also learned most from what was modeled for you. Let's talk about prior generations. And because of my age and because it's my reference point, I'll primarily be talking about my mother's generation. My mother is 91 years old. And so it's her generation, the take no prisoners generation, that really started the whole decay. You're farther down the line than I am. But that's what I mean when I say the prior generation. The prior generation didn't know that they were in charge of our emotional safety. They thought their job was to clothe us, feed us, send us to school, teach us right from wrong, and criticize the snot out of us for every possible thing they could, because that's how they used their power, right? But what they didn't realize was that that has a tariff on it. And let me tell it to you in a different way. Every child is made out of clay. And everything you're saying and doing, everything, every gesture, every body language, everything you're doing to interact with this child is making an impression in the clay. Positive, negatives. And when the clay goes to the kiln, the place where it gets hard, the clay gets hard, then what's hard about this is that those patterns carry with the child into adulthood. I'm sure you've had the experience of turning and saying something to a child that you promised you never do. I'll never do something your parents did, right? But here's the deal. If somebody this tall has more power than you have in a moment, and you've used every technique you can think of, then where do you go? What was modeled for you? You go right back to that thing you promised that you would never do. So you can do something that you abhor. And, again, hooking into this idea, those things that were in the clay, those negative imprints, they stay with you forever. You don't ever lose them. My mother has Alzheimer's disease. I want to say Alzheimer's because it's easier, but it's not correct, all right? She has that disease, I said correctly in the first part of that, okay? And so when in the early part of her disease, I was learning to work with her. And I fixed her a meal, and she took a bite, and she said, "Ow, that's terrible," and slid the plate across the table. I turned into a spewing volcano. I was a rageaholic. I was, don't you feel better knowing that? Okay? I was screaming and yelling at an old lady in her late 80s who has a brain disease. How did that happen? Well, she hit my not good enough button. Not good enough, not good enough, not good enough. That was the button that I was raised with. She hit it. Now, what's happened for me, with a lot of help from a friend, Dr. Lisa, has helped me that I'm never going to get rid of that imprint in the clay. I'm not going to get rid of it, but I can override it. And one of the ways that has helped me specifically with this problem is a question. What do you think would it be like? What do you think it would be like for her to be trapped in her body with this disease? Can you imagine how frustrating it is for her? So now when she goes and gets my button, she gets it. I can just turn it and let it go. But he needed to understand that the button existed in order to work with it. And what I'm saying to you is we don't want the buttons in your children. That's what this series is about, to help you put more positives in the clay than negatives. Another thing that the older generation did is that they were always right. Well, here's the deal. If a parent's always right, it stops down the child's development process. So they don't think because they don't have to think because somebody's thinking for them. And that doesn't work for a child to be safe because they have to learn to think. Let's say, for example, your child came home from school and said, "John's dad said that people who are homeless are lazy." Now, you're sitting there and you have a whole bunch of opinions and ideas about homelessness, and your tendency is to take your little bundle of information and go and snap up the light of the child or the child's thinking process. It would be far better to say to the child, "Well, what do you think about that?" And then, "What do you think about that?" And, "Well, if this were to, what would," and you have a discussion about it in which you can put your opinions and feelings and the child can hear them. But if you come in and go like that, the child will learn not to listen to you. I remember when my brother, whom I love and cherish, my brother was younger. He came home one day from school and he said, "You know, I don't think communism would be that bad a way to run a country." Now you got to understand, my family are staunch conservative Republicans, okay? So my little 12-year-old brother dropped this bomb at the dinner table. My dad went nuts. He went crazy. Boom! All right? The lecture was endless. The body language was scary. It was like, "You dumb, stupid idiot. How could you possibly think that?" The whole thing. And I watched my brother just pull back and make a decision at 12. I'm not sharing what I think with him ever again. You want to know what they're thinking, because then you can help them to think about it in a bigger way. But they won't tell you if you cut them off by having your idea, smothering them with your idea. A great way to do this is to say, "What do you think about that?" Or, "Tell me more about that." "I hate my sister." See, you want to go, "No, you don't hate your sister." "Tell me more about that. Tell me more about that. Tell me more about that." Because what the child's going to do is unravel the venom to get down to, "Well, I don't really hate her, but I wish she would stop tripping me every time I walk through whatever the problem is." But he can't get to the problem through all the anger and frustration. "Tell me more about that. Tell me more about that." And it keeps the door open. Child comes home from school and says, "I hate my teacher." "Tell me more about that." "School is boring." "Tell me more about that." It keeps the door open. It's a great phrase. The prior generation told us how to think about something. It's kind of similar to what I just said, but it's different. I remember walking in Maui, Hawaiian Islands, with my father, and there was a man sitting there, and he was meditating. And as we walked by, my dad made a derogatory comment about what he was doing. And I turned and looked at the man, and I thought he looked more peaceful than I felt or had experienced feeling. But because my dad had put the mark on meditating, I walked around it for many, many years. Later on, I took classes in it. And I would like to say that I practice it every day, but I don't. And when I do, I stay very, very grounded and my life has had much more balance in it. But I would have walked around it forever if I hadn't had a life experience that invited me in, because my dad did. If he had just said to me, that doesn't appeal to me, or I don't see the value in that, then it keeps the door open. I think we've got to watch how we talk to children. Playing in the neighborhood was a great, great teacher for children. My children came home from school, had a snack, and went into the neighborhood. There's no place for children to be children anymore. And so what that is creating is more of this problem that I'm talking about, because everything is a contest for children. They are constantly measured off of what some other child is doing. So this generation, your generation, have found a new way to be always critical of children, which totally decays their self-esteem, totally ruins their ability to make their own choices, totally ruins their ability to be solid human beings. You can't compare children and have them turn out with a sense of positive identity. You can't criticize children and not have it have a negative effect. So this generation, you have found a new way to criticize children by comparing them and by criticizing them because you're measuring them off of other children. It needs to stop. Your children are going to burn out. They're going to self-destruct. They're going to take drugs. They're going to harm themselves if they don't get more emotional support than just the climate they're in is providing for them right now. My sister, whom I love and dearly love, and I were talking about, we were strategizing about her then teenage son. And we were talking about what we would do and how we could help him and all this. And my mom was listening. And all of a sudden she said, I don't know why you girls talk so much about raising children. We just did it. Yeah, they just did it. I'm a byproduct of just doing it, parenting. And I want to assure you that who's sitting here in front of this camera isn't the person I'm talking about. I was very broken back there, very damaged, very harmed. And by the grace of God and a lot of work from me and a lot of help from friends and a lot of love from friends, I somehow got out of the place where I had more negative imprints in the clay. And what I want for you and why I'm doing this series is I don't want you to have the pain I had and the struggles I had. And I certainly don't want your children to. So I'm trying to help you to figure out how to do it better and how to be more so that you can. Prior generations acted as if they were perfect. Here's the problem with this. If you're always perfect, where is a child going to learn how to make mistakes? To totally mess up something and recover from it. If you don't model making mistakes and that you can live through a mistake and it's okay, your children can't learn that. One day, all the children were in a room together and I reamed them. I reamed them. I yelled at them. Feeling better? I screamed at him. Yeah, see, I did it too. I reamed him. And I went out and slammed the door in case he didn't notice I was angry, okay? As I'm going down the hall, I'm going, because what I was working on was not being so retroactive and not being so angry. So I went back and I knocked on the door. Nobody answered because they were mad at me. All right, so I opened the door and I didn't grovel. See, I'm modeling here. I said, you know what? I just delivered that message in a way that was inappropriate. Here is what I wanted to say to you. And I told them what the message was. And I apologized for all the anger that I wrapped around it. Does anybody have anything they want to say? And they said whatever they wanted to say. And I said, I'm working on this. I apologize. And walked out. That way I'm modeling. Yep, I just screwed up. I just messed up. I just went off track of who I want to be. But I didn't grovel, I didn't cry, I didn't go do a big drama or the emotional stuff, and I'm so capable of doing that. All right? I just went back and cleaned it up, and I went on with my life. You've got to teach your children that mistakes are the way you learn. It's impossible not to make mistakes, and that we don't have to grovel or be brought down by them. I could have done my whole life better. I don't wish that I had, because I like the byproduct of all the things I learned. But I do want you to invest in your children so that they don't have to unravel so much of the past. And I am trying to help with that. Pay attention. Pay attention to your attitudes. Pay attention to how you handle anger. You want to pay attention to how you live your life. And if you want help with that, you want to purchase my Leave Your Baggage at the Door book, because it was written for that intent. Pay attention. I have a story for you, true story. When Scott was 4 years old, he was sitting in the way back of the station wagon. This dates me, doesn't it? No seatbelts yet. He was way back in the station wagon. He would sit back in the corner and wave out the back. This is Scott to a T, all right? One day he crawled up to the front and he put his arms on the seat and he's eyeballing me in the rearview mirror. And he said, Mom. And I said, yes, Scott. And he said, Mom, I waved and waved at this man, but he didn't wave back at me. How come he didn't wave back at me, Mom? And I looked in the rearview mirror and I said, maybe he just isn't a waver, Scott. And he looked at me, cocked his head, thought about what I said, and he went, oh. And he went back to his corner and resumed waving. Now, I could tell when somebody didn't wave back because you'd hear his tiny little 4-year-old voice say, uh-oh, guess he or she isn't a waver. It's a darling story, and you're going to think of it whenever you see a child waving out of a car, which of course is my point. Here's the real point. What else could I have said to the boy? Mom, I waved and waved at this man, but he didn't wave back at me. How come he didn't wave back at me? Probably a jerk. Probably hates kids. I could have taken a whole bunch of garbage and just gone and stuffed it down this beautiful little boy's throat. Instead, I said, some people wave, some people don't, Scott. And he went on waving through his entire life. Pay attention to what you're teaching. Your homework this week is to pay attention every night. Every night, ask yourself, just turn and look back at the day and say, what did I model today? Pick one thing that you'd like to change and work on it tomorrow. Don't beat yourself up for the things you saw. This is a process. That's why we don't have this one big, long lesson. We have little lessons, little lessons, little lessons, because it's a process of changing. The caterpillar doesn't just go and turn into a butterfly. There's a metamorphosis that needs to happen, and it takes time. Don't beat yourself up. Do the best you can. Change one thing. Next day, look at, change one thing. Change one thing. And even if you do it 2 or 3 days, you say, I'm going to change that tomorrow, and you don't worry about it. Keep going. God willing, and the creek don't rise, is that the saying? God willing, and the creek don't rise. You'll have another day to do it again, and again, and again. Change is a process. Your child's life is at stake. Do your best. It's good enough. Have a beautiful day. And take gentle care of you.